Good afternoon, everybody. I've thoroughly enjoyed this conference. Joe, I think, has done a great job of making it relaxed and fun. So I hope I can continue that relaxed funness as I give you a presentation today around numbers and how we play with numbers and how do you integrate numbers into your medical devices at the end of the day. So a few thoughts to consider. I'll give you a few ideas that I have and from my experience of actually leading data science work over the past few years. What I'm going to discuss today, well, start off in the upper left-hand corner there for you guys. Our digitized world, talk a little bit about that. A few examples around data analytics, kind of the process that it takes and how an example of an integration that we've done with a customer into a device. Some of the challenges and headaches, and then I'll talk about next steps. Oh, I get to see it down below, cool. So let's take a step back and really figure out what are we trying to do with medical devices. At a high level, there's this strong balance between the experience of technology and the experience of our world. And like children learning how to play with things, I think a lot of us are doing that in the medical devices. We're trying to get a balance here, and a very delicate balance, between the technology, between our experience of the world, and ultimately a future that we want to have and the future that we've actually inherited. We talked about cybersecurity and Joe's plea for, hey, get on the bandwagon here. That's something that we're going to inherit if we don't take a proactive role in doing that. So as we're trying to work through this balance, what we've done in our world is we've started digitizing a lot of things. And the question is, where does it fit into our world? It's been around for years, and I like these set of images because they're contrasting from a way of connection. And I think digitization is about connecting at a distance. The one here on your left is about connections within, think of a circuitry board. Things are being connected. There's digitization going on there. On the far right, there's connection. We all have or have been through the teenage years where we've got headphones on and we want to tune out the world, but while we're tuning out the world, we're actually connected to something at the same time. And the middle images is more around the idea of a digital twin. How are we painting ourselves? How are we representing ourselves? And as we think about medical devices and technology, the quote that came out of a conference a few years ago that I really enjoyed was, "The best technology is that which I don't see or notice." And I think ultimately in our lives, we want to minimize that encroachment of technology and be able to enjoy our lived experience. So as we do that, what's this digitization of things all about? Well, it's only going to expand, it's only going to grow. And I like to define IoT in general as a digitization of all things mechanical, non-mechanical, and then some other things. And as I've been doing this over the last 4 years with companies, I've noticed that there's a lot of skills that are needed, and it's a mishmash of a variety of skills, and nobody's really perfect at it yet. But when we take a look at the medical device field, you pretty well understand how do you go ahead and bring something to market. That's not new. A lot of companies are doing it out there today, and you're going to continue to be doing that. But as you start digitizing devices, it's a foreign concept. And how does it fit into that product development that you have going on? Here's how I define a connected services platform, or when you digitize a device at the end of the day, you've manufactured your digital device, that medical device there in the upper left-hand corner. You've got some connectivity around it. You have data storage. You have accessibility and security that's important. You have different data integrations that you're making. And then the three colored boxes in blue are more about value creation, analytics, AI, data science in that world, which all lead us to the idea of patient outcome. What is data science? I define it here as a process of using mathematical algorithms to automate, predict, or describe, or control, throw that word in there, an interaction in the physical world. And it still is a challenge from an execution perspective. The latest research I've read estimates that about 15% of data science projects actually succeed. And that's actually worse than most IT change projects. So we've got an uphill battle to work through. And it does take some blocking and tackling to figure it out. And I like that little image there of the Lego characters and trying to figure out how to overcome the challenge ahead of them. And I think as I review the history of where data science has come from, we take a look at buzzwords such as neural nets, deep learning that have been talked about, artificial intelligence. It's historical out of the 90s. We've got better capacity for computing. We've got better capacity to store data. But at the end of the day, it really was a niche skill set that now has to be leveraged further and further in your companies, and more people have to be aware of it. A couple years ago, I was at a conference hosted at Optum Healthcare, and Optum Healthcare went ahead and said, we are training everybody on machine learning. Everybody in our company has to have that mindset and that skill set. So they see it as a core skill for all of their employees. So now let's get into what is data science. Well, I like to think of data science as a process when you're working with integrating it into your products. If you were to ask a data scientist today, what do? They would point to that large circle in the middle there in the blue. They would say, this is everything I do. But on the projects that I work on when we do data science work or advanced analytics, machine learning, AI, we do all of this. And it takes a variety of individuals in the corporation to support this endeavor and to actually execute on it. So we start in the bottom left-hand corner. We start with a business question. Do you know what you're trying to accomplish with this? What do you want your device to do? What's the output that you want? You work through the engineers or you work through with your subject matter experts, and then you move into the data science realm. You start a discovery phase, and then you move into a design phase, which is really where you have a lot of hypothesis generation. Does the data explain things? What kind of engineering data am I coming out? And a lot of what we try to do is blend the physical data along with the data side of things. Data tells us so much, but our physical engineering world tells us a lot too on the devices that we're measuring and what we're trying to monitor. And then we have to deliver it at the end of the day. And that delivery is more of a software development cycle. So sometimes people think of data science as a software development, but it's different because we've got different phases. Sometimes we do software development, sometimes we're pure science driven, and we've got verification of things that we're doing. And here's an example of a development process that we've done recently with a customer. Start in the bottom left there. We've identified what metrics they're looking to monitor. What is it their outcomes is desired. We identify the different variables. What are the machine variables? What are integration variables that we're doing from third-party sources? We estimate processing power, data storage. Are we doing it at the edge on the device? Are we pushing it up to the cloud? Once we've got that all put together, we have to design the algorithms. We have to test them. We have to put them into testing environment. We have to perform unit testing. And at this point in time, we kind of branch in to what you would typically do for any other type of device development. You've got different processes that you have to work on and follow so that you can actually have a defined product at the end of the day that you can deploy to your customers. Additionally to that, as was mentioned in the previous talk, what if you're going to do an update? So algorithms get stale over time, data-driven ones especially do. So you have to build in a strategy to maintain and update them at the same time. So when I talk about advanced analytics and data science, what exactly is it that we are doing? Well, I like to think of it as a variety of layers. Conversation I had with a customer this morning, we were talking about fast data versus slow data. Some analytics require very fast response time. Other analytics can be daytime oriented. But there's a lot of different layers to it. And when I think of analytics, I think of many things that you would think of here would be simple rule-based analytics. They're driven by conventional wisdom, they're engineering. And then you'll get into some complex rule-based analytics. You may work with some asynchronous event analytics. You might work with time series. Batch analytics, and I'll get into a little bit more batch analytics, which is what I think more people are familiar with. We have what's called CEP, or complex event processing, and I'll give you an example of that here. And then we move into what most people would consider machine learning or artificial intelligence, and those would be supervised learning models or unsupervised learning models. Batch analytics is what you're mostly familiar with. You take a batch of data and you do something on it. So we have descriptive data, we have diagnostic data, we move into predictive data, prescriptive data, and I like to focus with customers here also on the persuasive and the strategic side of things. So how do you bring all of that data back into your product development strategically? Here's an example of an analytics architecture. And when we go and work with our customers, we like to think of analytics as an architecture, not as a single event or a single item that I'm providing you. And this gets into complex event processing. And you've got sensors on the bottom. We have one layer of event recognition. This could be some machine learning models. We may go up to layer 2, which might have some simple heuristics that we're identifying from a business perspective. And you might move up into layer 3, which would also be another set of heuristics, but they could now be predictive based at the end of the day. So the models are not pure A to B. There's a lot of activities within them that you're trying to identify, even when you're trying to define self-learning. So if I have some items in layer 2, does it need to inform layer 1 again so that it can learn on its own? Why do we do all of this? Well, the ultimate goal in doing all of this is to take all of this data, all of these numbers, and turn it into something that's more than just numbers. We're trying to figure out how it explains our world, helps us make decisions around our world. A couple of weeks ago, I was chatting with an economist from MIT who focuses on labor. And we were having the conversation around, is AI going to destroy jobs? And his comment was, well, it'll destroy some jobs, but it'll also create a lot of new jobs that we're not familiar with. And a lot of that will come out of the human activities that we're using to consume all of this information and what's going on with artificial intelligence and how it's designed. I still have decisions that I need to make at a human level, and there are the unknown unknowns. So I start introducing things into a system. So where does that leave us with how do we get this done? So I thought I'd share a few thoughts on the challenges I've experienced, I've seen other people experience when it comes to working with data science or big data or the digitization of medical devices. Big data is a term that's been thrown around for about 4 or 5 years. It encompasses a lot, but it's typically an IT term. And this IT term has some baggage associated with it, but when you try to go ahead and implement a big data project, you're going to come into a few challenges. One of them is harnessing the data. There's lots of volumes that are streamed up. We have working with a customer that does 10 millisecond data. Streaming that up from 10,000 devices is a lot of data that you're capturing. A couple years ago, I heard that you can, when you outfit the human with a bunch of sensors, you can get 4 gigs of data a day. So 4 gigs of data a day from all of us in here is a lot of data that you have to store, process, review, and you have to build some logic on top of it and how to filter it, and then how to find that meaningful data. That's another challenge with harnessing the data is how do you find informative, informational, actionable intelligence out of it? That's a challenge, because oftentimes we're looking for the needle in a haystack, for the events that were not aware of. And machine learning models can help us identify those anomalies, but they can't interpret those anomalies. Other times you can get involved in too much analysis. I've found that if you ask a data scientist to research a project, he'll go on for months, years, similar to an engineer. They'll just keep designing and designing without ever delivering something at the end of the day. So you've got to be able to put some bounds on it as to what's acceptable and what's not. And another challenge is the real-time execution of that. How fast do I need to understand that data? And am I building the right capabilities for the infrastructure behind it? Am I overbuilding it? You can go to Microsoft Azure Stack, and they're going to sell you on the latest and greatest of getting your products to the moon and back. But sometimes you don't need that. Sometimes you need something different. So when it comes to the execution of data science, here are a few thoughts that I've come up with that I think would be informative. Sometimes we start solving the wrong problem. We're disconnect from our customers and the business needs. Sometimes we're trying to solve the right problem, but the world changed under your feet. That's a common one. I need to solve X, but everybody went a different direction. So now you've lost some time in designing your algorithms. Big one I see from the business side is that you treat data science as a moonshot, meaning there's our goal, let's get to it and we're done. But unfortunately, that's not what it is. You have to think about data science and advanced analytics as a lap around the track. You're going to do this multiple times with multiple iterations, and you need to find metrics to understand, was I successful every time I went around? Are we achieving the goals that we're after? There's a difference between artisan thinking and modular thinking. Most data scientists, even though there is some computer science background to them, they don't think in modules. They think as an artist. Let me put all of this stuff together. I'll take this and I'll take this. And isn't it so beautiful? Look at what I did. But it's not usable, okay? I need to iterate off of that. I need to take that and put a piece over here and a piece over there so that it can be reused at the end of the day. Another challenge is around the organizational incentive structures. Oftentimes I found that data scientists will go ahead and get incentivized for how many new models they created. So, created 5 new models this year. Great. Well, what'd you do with the other 5 the previous year? Well, I haven't touched those at all. Are they being successful for the business? Is the business still using them? Is it predicting what you're after? When you've got a medical device, you need to also develop another assessment level on top of that. And I'll get into that a little bit more too. Another challenge is that traditional testing has limited efficacy. So when we think of, in an engineering world, it's right or wrong. Well, in a data science world, it's all probabilities. It could be, or it could not be. If you go into a 99.9% probability, what's the business risk behind that 0.1%? It's there. There's not much you can do about it. And then you have, and oftentimes that when you dig into some of these data science projects, you start asking new questions and trying to uncover new answers. Another challenge I find is that oftentimes we're fixated on tools. Here's the latest tool, it'll solve all my problems. Well, it's really about the skills and capabilities that your data scientists have and their ability to deliver on what you're asking them to do. Show this image again because I'd like to reinforce the idea. If you can't explain the process, you don't know what you are doing. So if you ask a data scientist, what's your process for getting from data all the way to the end deliverable for a customer? They should be able to tell you that. And that includes visualization, that includes communication, that includes a wide variety of things that they're typically not trained for. But it is important in order to successfully deliver on a data science project. When I think of working with the companies out there that I've done work with, I've organized our work into 5 different buckets. And the first bucket has to do with, I've got an idea, does it work? It's analytics incubation. All right, we work through that idea, we validate that idea, and that's most of the time where a data scientist is trained to sit in those 2 buckets. After you've validated the idea, now you actually need to bring it to fruition into the world. You need to start enabling it. Okay? That's a different set of skills also. So as you're looking at building out a data science team, or a team that's working on the digitization that's coming off of your medical devices, you need to be thinking of how are the team members oriented so that they can so you can leverage their skills to effectively maintain this analytic product at the end of the day. I think in the future you are going to see analytic product managers. So you'll have a product manager and you'll have an analytic product manager. If they're that core to your product, you will need somebody treating the analytics as an individualized product within the whole product itself. And part of that includes looking at the enablement strategies that you have, looking at how the analytics are going to be consumed, whether it's on an app, how much information are you giving or are you not giving, and then lastly, how are you going to maintain it? So given all of that, on the execution side from a data scientist perspective, where do we find that business is failing? Well, I find that businesses don't necessarily understand the investment needed, and they're not understanding the investment within project management, on how important it is to work through iterative cycles and be on top of those cycles, no different than software development today. I see it's a challenge to get buy-in across the whole organization, okay? And that stems from 2 sides of things. One, I don't think it'll work, it's a bunch of hoopla, or, well, you promised me the world and you haven't delivered it. When are you gonna deliver it? So there's wide variety of expectations and you need to be able to communicate that effectively. Another challenge is not being able to update or replace analytic components. The previous person talked about being able to update a pacemaker and giving the doctors the choice to do that, but what if you've got an analytic in that pacemaker and you found out there's a flaw in that analytic? How are you going to update that? What are the ramifications for that at the end of the day? Sometimes you need to have an exit strategy when an analytic is not going to work. If you're going to get to 70% because you have too much variance in the data or you can't account for everything, you just have to throw your hands up and say, we're going to go a different direction. But most of the time, they don't have a plan B or an exit strategy on analytics if they're not going to work. Or you need to say, hey, 70% accuracy is pretty good. I'll take it. And I've had customers say that. I moved from 50% to 70%. That 20% saved me $20 million. I'll go with it. Okay? But you need to understand that. Downplaying security and privacy threats. A lot of this has to do around intellectual protocol or intellectual property. So your IP is inside of your algorithms. You can't patent data, but you can patent the process on that data. So if you have something unique that you're doing with that data, you want to make sure that you're keeping it secure. Once again, we focus on technology over business. And then lastly, in a lot of where I find interaction with, it's the difference between operational technology and infrastructure technology, so the OT-IT side. We did a project with medical equipment, large capital piece of equipment, where we were designing predictive algorithms to assess failure and notify technicians. And the IT team was having a difficult time playing with the engineers who were working on the actual operational technology within the equipment. And how do we get the analytics in there? How do we communicate the information? And it's a big challenge out there, less so I find in the medical space than in other industries, but how do you get these 2 different groups of people talking together? How do you measure your success? I'll briefly point to the idea of measurement is important. How do you know your data scientists or your analytic team is being successful in what they're doing? Just because they succeeded this month doesn't mean they're going to succeed the next month. So have you defined your right KPIs? And so next steps here, how do we scale data science to become a business discipline? Well, first of all, you want to measure everything, including yourself. I think a very good way to measure is your iterations. How fast can you scale? How fast are you scaling? Have you modularized so that you're reusing components more frequently? Data scientists love to build from the ground up, but if they're doing that all the time, your projects are always going to take 3 months. And if you're looking to get to a 3-week turnaround, you have to enable some efficiencies and scalability in there. I talked about socializing metrics. That's very important for helping everybody come up to speed and understand what data science can and cannot do. Additionally, success is not an individual. I like to think of it as a constellation out there. There's not going to be any shooting stars that are going to make data science successful, but a constellation, so a group of them. I've got just a few minutes here.
Just a few. I'm watching the clock.
So am I. But a quick review of what to expect when building out your advanced analytics. You know, business leaders want it tomorrow. It is a lap. It's not a moonshot. At the end of the day, we're running around laps. IT departments think they know everything. I'll just leave it there. Data science is a process, but at some level, it isn't a process. It should be integrated also into your process for developing products. So as a process, it works by itself, but you also need to find a way to integrate it into that process, which I think is a challenge. Don't underestimate the challenge of change management. There is a need for that, and I find that's perhaps one of the biggest hurdles as I find companies and work with them as they build out data science teams, is that they don't understand how important it is to continue feeding out the messages of what's going on and educating people on data science. It shouldn't be a black box at the end of the day, but for the most part it really is. We treat it as something that operates independently. So we need to have strategies for communicating work that's going on. You'd be surprised at how many companies actually have 5 different groups working on the same type of analytic. And when you're not communicating, you're wasting resources at the end of the day. So lastly, I like the picture of the ear. We've got to listen. And the questions I would ask you is, what are you trying to do with your analytics, with your data science? What's your goal? You really have to start there, otherwise you're just making shiny objects. And then the other question to consider is, are you making products with analytics, or are you making products inside of analytics? And there's a big distinction there, particularly when you're looking at the medical industry. So with that,
I will, with your 51 remaining seconds, say that I had a CEO once who, you've probably heard this expression, it said, metrics guide, management decides. Mm-hmm. How often have you found working with medical device manufacturers that the data clearly says, but they've already made some promise to the board that they're going to go forward anyhow, and they end up just going headlong into what is doomed to fail before they even get started? Without naming names.
Yeah. I mean, so Jonathan Haidt, a psychologist, wrote a book around happiness. I think he used a great metaphor. He says, rationality is like a rider on an elephant, and the elephant is emotionality. And oftentimes, regardless of how much rationality we have and the data points to the right thing, the emotions that we have as humans and the commitments we've made, they're just going to run rampant at the end of the day. So I see that frequently, and which is where I point to communication is very important. So you're getting people on the right side of the conversation.
Thank you, Sean.
Thank you, Joe.